Now, how do we get control of the tongue? James says, no man can control the tongue, but God can. And because God lives in you, you can get control of the tongue. And there's one word that'll do it: love. Love. You will love your neighbor as yourself. Love can control the tongue. Love can keep you from slander. Love will keep you from ruining somebody's reputation if you love them. A tongue can be very destructive. Probably more sins have been committed by our mouths than all other body parts combined. I was listening to a radio talk show a while back, Christian program, where people would call in questions, they would be answered or discussed on the air. And I tuned in right at the time when they were talking about speaking in tongues, the controversy of that spiritual gift that is disputed by many different churches. And as they were going back and forth about, is it okay to speak in tongues? Is it not okay to speak in tongues? Is it a legitimate gift or not? I thought, well, nobody seems to be really concerned about the real problem. And the real problem isn't just speaking in tongues, it's speaking. It's using our tongues, period. That's really what we have to watch. And in particular, it's speaking a certain way. It's using our tongues to form words for a specific purpose. Now, as I describe this vice to you, it is personified, and you'll be able to tell what it is. I am more deadly than the screaming shell of a cannon. I win without killing. I tear down homes, break hearts, and wreck lives. I travel on the wings of the wind. No innocence is strong enough to intimidate me. No purity is pure enough to daunt me. I have no regard for truth, no respect for justice, no mercy for the defenseless. My victims are as numerous as the sands of the sea, and often as innocent. I never forget, and I seldom forgive. My name is gossip. Well, now that we've named it, let's study it. And to do so, I've asked you to turn to Leviticus chapter 19. Now, the Bible does talk about gossip in a number of different passages from Genesis to Revelation. But the reason I've asked you to turn to this passage is because we are given a direct command from God not to do it. It's a hefty, unmistakable, thou shalt not command. And our anchor text is Leviticus 19, go down to verse 16, where it simply says, you shall not go about as a talebearer among your people. It doesn't get any more direct than that. You shall not go about as a talebearer among your people. Now, let's just step back for a moment, because we're looking at the book of Leviticus, and this book has a single theme. It could be summed up in one word: holiness. The book of Leviticus is about holiness, God's holiness. And I suppose that of all the attributes that God has, holiness is God's least attractive attribute. If you just think about how people deal with God, holiness would be his least popular one. We love to make a lot of God's love. That's an important attribute to us. We want to talk about God's mercy and God's grace, important attributes to us. We want to talk about the fact that God knows everything. He's omniscient. God's power is another attribute. He's omnipotent. But God's holiness probably takes lowest billing. It scares us. And that's probably because, number one, we don't really know what it means, and number two, we don't really know what it would mean to us. But here's what you need to know. Of all the attributes of God written about in Scripture, holiness is talked about more than all of them. In fact, God is called holy more than he is called loving or gracious or merciful or powerful. He's called holy. So it's obviously very important to him, and I share all that upfront information because you're going to come across it in some of the verses we're going to look at. So the theme of this book is holiness, God's and yours. And the book of Leviticus could be divided simply by saying that the first half of the book is about approaching God's presence, and the second half of the book is about accepting God's precepts. So approaching God's presence, accepting God's precepts. Chapter 19 falls in the second portion of the book, so it's about accepting God's precepts. And you're going to notice something. It's familiar to you as I read. What we are going to look at are what you know as the 10 Commandments. They're repeated and then they're fleshed out. That is, they're explained in various life situations. So, for example, if you look at verse 1 of Leviticus 19, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to all the congregation of the children of Israel, and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Every one of you shall revere his mother and his father, and keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. Do not turn to idols, nor make yourselves molded gods. I am the Lord your God." So just in the first 4 verses, we have a repetition or a hint of the first 5 of the 10 commandments. Then, in verse 11, he starts dealing with, among other things, what we say, our speech, our words. And what I'd like to do in verses 11 through 18 is look at 4 practical observations about our words. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start wide and go narrow. That's the approach. I'm going to go very general, and then we'll get specific. Or if you like, I'm going to start shallower and go deeper. So the first observation about words is that words are personal. Words are personal. They personally convey who you are as a person to others. So notice a word as we go through a couple verses. Look at verse 11. I'm going to emphasize the word. You'll see why. You shall not steal, nor deal falsely, nor lie to one another. And you shall not swear, verse 12, by my name falsely. Nor shall you profane the name of the Lord your God. I am the Lord. Verse 14, you shall not curse the deaf, nor put a stumbling block before the blind. Boy, you got to be creepy to do that. But you shall fear the Lord your God, or fear your God, I am the Lord. Verse 16, you shall not go about as a talebearer among your people, nor shall you take a stand against the life of your neighbor. I am the Lord. Now, I counted in this chapter the word you 54 times in this chapter alone. God is speaking through Moses to the people, telling them about their personal expression, their personal life, fleshing out the 10 Commandments to them personally. So here's the theme. God has given us an incredible capacity to communicate who we are through the use of our words. We can communicate our thoughts, our feelings, our values, our ideas, our ideals to people, our desires, our dislikes through our words. And we do regularly. The average person will end up speaking 1/5 of their entire life. That's incredible. You will spend 1/5 of your life talking. Now, some will do much more than that. Some will do much less than that. 1/5 of your life will be spent verbally communicating, talking. If you want to know what that looks like, if you were to take the words you speak in a single day and translate them into published literature, a single day of your speech would produce a book that's 50 pages long. A 50-page book. In a single year, that would be 132 volumes of 200 pages per volume. So that your whole lifetime would be upward of 3,000 volumes or 1,500,000 pages. And that's the average. The average person speaks for 1/5 of his or her lifetime. Now, you also know there is a difference in the genders between male and female. And I'll put this very delicately, but it would seem that females have a greater linguistic ability. Let's put it that way. A more developed linguistic ability, able to use words, maybe better, maybe differently. So what the experts tell us, and you probably read many of these kinds of things, but the average woman speaks 25,500 words a day. That's average. The average male speaks 12,500 words a day. So there's a big difference. Now, what does that mean? It means he comes home after 8 days or 8 hours of work, comes home, and he's already used up 12,495 words. He's got 5 left. She's just getting revved up. So he's got 5 words left. What's he going to say? Well, he's going to say, "What's for dinner?" That's 3. And good night. He's done. That's 5 words. Now, here's the result. If you were to ask him, "Hey, how's everything at home?" He's going to say, "Great." Ask her how everything's going at home, and she might say, "Well, he never really tells me anything." This is why I've always found it humorous in the Bible that when Zacharias the priest is burning incense in Jerusalem in the temple, and an angel comes to him to announce that his wife Elizabeth is going to have John the Baptist, Zacharias, who is talking to an angel says, "This is going to happen." Zacharias says, "Prove it." It's like, "Really? Prove it? An angel's talking to you. Isn't that proof enough?" No, he goes, "No, give me a sign that this is really going to happen." So the angel goes, "Really? You want a sign? All right, I'll give you a sign. You won't be able to talk till that baby's born." Now, how is that for him going home, and he can't say anything or stop any conversation, but his wife is awfully excited about a miraculous birth. She's an old lady having a baby, and she's going to be talking to him all day, and he can't say a word. And it's frustrating for her because he can't say a word. I've always thought that was just a humorous portion of the Bible. So words are personal. We use them to communicate who we are. But we are faced with a challenge in our day and age because we not only speak words, but we write them down. We write them down on paper. We type them into our computer screens. We text them on our mobile devices. We post them on social media. And with each of those steps, our communication becomes more and more impersonal. We get less personal with all those stages. So written words or texted words are more difficult to understand because you're seeing the word and ascribing meaning to the word that you see, but you cannot hear the intonation or the voice inflection. And that would change everything. And so a better form of communication than reading a text or an email would be to pick up the phone and talk to the person because they might say that sentence a little bit differently than you read it to mean. Because now you're getting a fuller communication. You're hearing tone and inflection. But even that isn't ideal because there's still a lot of the conversation that you don't pick up on because you don't see what experts have called for a long time body language, which changes everything. So a person might say something using the words that you would read in a text or using a voice inflection you would hear on a telephone, but when they say the sentence, they raise an eyebrow. Well, that means something. Or they might say a word but give a smirk. Well, that means something. Or they'll talk, and as they talk, they shift their posture. Without all of that means something. So the fullest form of communication is to eye have a conversation where you are engaged in that conversation, hearing words and using words. Now, I say we have a challenge. What do I mean? Well, social media has revolutionized the way our culture communicates. Nobody will dispute that. Everybody's been studying this for years would agree with that. That social media has revolutionized the way our culture communicates. For the first time in history, it's possible to have friends you've never met, to follow people you don't even know. So our language itself is changing meaning by the way we communicate. we are cultivating what Harvard Business Review calls thin relationships. Thin relationships as opposed to full, rich relationships, thin relationships. Gervais Markham, a Mozilla Foundation computer programmer, wrote this, and I quote, "Social networking encourages people to have a greater number of much shallower friendships. I know what 15 of my friends had for breakfast, but I don't know whether any of them is struggling with a major life issue. If this trend continues," says Markham, "people in 2020 will have hundreds of acquaintances, but very few friends." So you see, if fellowship is limited to 140 characters, it's not real fellowship. So words are personal. We use them to communicate who we are. Now let's go a little deeper. Words are not only personal, words have potential. As we look at the verses that are before us with our open Bibles, we can look at them and we can surmise that there is great potential in the tongue. Now here, the potential is seen negatively. It's put in negative form. You shall not do this. So the reason it's put in negative form, you shall not, is for impact and to restrain the improper use of the tongue and to redirect a proper use of the tongue, right? So if we reverse these negative commands, we can see the potential instantly. For example, look at verse 11. We're told in the second verse, a second part of that verse, that we're not to lie to one another. Okay, so that's what we're not supposed to do. Don't do this. Don't lie to each other. Now turn that around. If we're not supposed to lie to each other, it also means we can, what? Tell the truth. Be truthful. Be honest. That's the potential. We can lie, or we can be truthful. We can be honest. We can be wholesome. Also look at verse 12. You shall not swear by my name falsely. There's another negative. Don't do that. Don't swear by God's name falsely. Okay, now turn that around. We can't swear by God's name falsely, so that means we can pray, we can worship, we can offer intercession, we can bless in the name of the Lord. Go down to verse 15. There's no negative, there's just a positive. It says, in righteousness you shall judge your neighbor. Now just think of the incredible potential to make personal judgments of human beings, personally or civilly, in a courtroom. So all of this incredible potential can be summed up by a single verse in the book of Proverbs, chapter 8, Proverbs 18, verse 21, that says, death and life are in the power of the tongue. There's the potential. Death and life. You can say a word that destroys, you can say a word that delights. You can say words that enrich, you can say words that kill. Incredible potential. Let me give you another verse out of Proverbs, does the same thing. It wraps all of this potential up, both negatively and positively, in one little nugget. Proverbs 12, verse 18. There is one who speaks like the piercings of a sword, but the tongue of the wise promotes health. You see how you got a bad way to use your tongue, a good way to use your tongue. There's the potential. Which way are you going to choose? There's one who speaks like the piercings of a sword. I bet all of you know a sharp-tongued individual. You can see that person in your mind's eye. It might be somebody you saw in the mirror today. It might be yourself. Sharp-tongued people, verbal terminators, I call them. They just, it's like a fire-breathing dragon. There are those who speak like the piercings of a sword or a snail, but the tongue of the wise promotes health. That's potential. Now, the book of James also does this, and if you feel so inclined, if not, I'll just read it to you. But the third chapter of the book of James, if you're quick with your thumbs, in your New Testament, you can find James chapter 3. James spends a chapter talking about our mouth, talking about how we use our tongues as Christian men and women. And he addresses the potential. James chapter 3, verse 2. He says, "For we all stumble in many things." Can I get an amen? We all do, don't we all? We blow it in a lot of different ways. "If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. Look also at ships. Although they are so large and driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder, wherever the pilot desires. Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles?" Down in verse 8, James 3, "But no man can tame the tongue," inferring only God can do that. "It's an unruly evil full of deadly poison. With it," now listen to this potential, "with it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the likeness of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren," speaking to believers, "my brethren, these things ought not to be so." Amazing, James says, the potential in a human tongue. In Greek mythology, there's a character named Proteus, and Proteus was the old man of the sea. He was the being that was subservient to Poseidon in the Greek myths. But Proteus had a very interesting ability. He could change form. He could morph. He could change appearance. So he could be a tree. He could be a pebble. He could show up as a lion or a dove, a serpent or a lamb. And that's like the tongue. The tongue can bless and curse, bless and blast. It can sing, it can slander, it can encourage, it can discourage. As an illustration, let's compare two people in relative recent history and compare how both of them, known for their speech, used it in two different ways. Let's compare Adolf Hitler and Dr. Billy Graham. Adolf Hitler swayed people with his speech, great masses of people. He turned a nation with his speeches, with his words. So when Adolf was growing up, he was tutored in giving speeches, in communication, and in mass psychology by a renowned European astrologer and occultist by the name of Erich Jan Hanussen. He taught Adolf how to speak to crowds, how to win crowds in his favor, how to turn their thinking around. And you know the results. It's been estimated that for every single word in Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, that 125 people lost their lives in World War II. He's responsible for the death of millions of people. Compare that to Dr. Billy Graham, who used his tongue for nothing else than proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ around the world. Billy Graham has preached to more people than any single human being who has ever lived in human history. Dr. Billy Graham has shared the gospel of Christ to over 215 million people in the stadiums of 185 different countries. Think of the different potential between those two individuals. So words have the potential to affect people for good or for evil. So words are personal, words have potential. Let's take it down a level. Not only that, but words are powerful. That's the thought in verse 16. Listen to the power. You shall not go about, this is a direct command, you shall not go about as a talebearer among your people. Now, what is a talebearer? It's pretty easy. A talebearer is somebody who bears a tale. I know you're going, duh. Think about it. He's bearing a tale. He has a story that he's bearing. He's carrying a story. And it's a story about someone. And a talebearer has a story about someone usually he doesn't like or she doesn't like. And there may be traces of truth in the tale that they bear. Maybe certain parts that are true, many parts that are not. It's a spin on the facts. But this person is telling the tale not to reveal the truth. The purpose is not to reveal the truth. The purpose is to ruin a person. The purpose is when I bear this tale in your hearing, you're going to hear it and change your thinking about the person I'm telling you about. You're going to change what you think about them. So I might say, well, let me tell you what he's really like. Let me tell you what I heard her say when I was eavesdropping. Well, you don't know all the facts. Let me tell you what really happened. And people lean in. The difference between a talebearer and a concerned friend is the difference between a butcher and a surgeon.
Understanding God's Word changes everything, and this Christmas you can give a better understanding of the Bible by choosing a gift from the Connect with Skip Heitzig Christmas Gift Ideas brochure. Consider this life-changing gift idea from Skip Heitzig, the You Can Understand package. One of our listeners recently shared, I was searching for a resource that would walk me through the Bible and teach me what it means. I had read the Bible but didn't understand it. That's how I found Skip Heitzig's teachings. I started with Genesis. It's so engaging and easy to understand. Start at the beginning with You Can Understand the Book of Genesis and discover the origins of God's redeeming love. And learn how to accurately interpret end times prophecy and live life with confidence in You Can Understand the Book of Revelation. Find the You Can Understand package and more meaningful gifts in the Connect with Skip Heitzig Christmas Gift Ideas brochure. Download yours today at connectwithskip.com/offer or call 800-922-1888.